Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Stampscaping 101. This is yet another coloring finishing video for a stamp sketch done in a previous video. This is a fairly simple composition in terms of the amount of imagery used and the amount of negative space that kind of remained. A couple different newer stamps in here, kind of based around, working around the lady in coffee. But this is the shore right, shore left, a bunch of rocks in here, stamped in various values of just black ink. Some of it just repeated to get a lighter version of it. So there's a couple different sizes of rocks in here to give it scale. Island in the background, and a slight horizon line just created with a little bit of a masking job. But for me, the thing that I was really going for in this scene right here is I stamped this composition with the idea of having a lot of foreground in here because we stamped our subject matter so high. So in this area down here, I mean, this is really the star of the subject, the scene right here. Your eyes goes directly to it and it anchors on there. But this whole passageway right here, I thought I can kind of create kind of a magical visual passageway leading up to that area and up into the horizon, I guess, with variations of values in here, and in this case I used a lot of pigment ink in here as well, and a lot of that white gel pen to create those little highlights in there, so it's kind of an illuminated little passageway, I think, for our visual lead-in into this. Otherwise, like I said, it's a pretty simplistic scene. So anyways, fun stuff. And if you choose to watch the video, I hope you enjoy it. Thanks as always for tuning into the channel. Okay, let's see what we can do with this stamp sketch composition. We can do this we can create any type of situation for this scene. It could be morning, afternoon, dusk, nighttime, whatever we want to do on this scene, because it's all been stamped out in just black ink, so all the imagery is dark enough to pretty much be representative of anything we want to do. There are leaves on the trees, so I don't know if it would be the dead of winter or something like that with those leaves remaining on there, but that's, I don't know, it's just getting technical. But from a compositional standpoint, we can do whatever we want. Now, what I was thinking about doing on this one was, I was thinking about this area in here, and I thought it would be really interesting to have it really kind of aglow and bathed in kind of bright light, maybe high noon or something like that, with a lot of kind of shimmering textures coming off the surface. Now I can add a little bit more texture up top here, but I thought I would just do it as is with color. All right, so we'll leave this one fairly light, and if I was taking a photograph, the exposure that I'm looking for is kind of a little bit overexposed. So let's see what that will turn out to be. So I'm thinking about kind of some washed out colors, in other words. And we'll see if we can kind of give this setting somewhat of a kind of a, I don't know, that type of mood. I've seen it in like different movies and things like that. That movie Splash comes to mind, a real old kind of mermaid movie. Ron Howard directed, but I really like the lighting in that movie. Everything's kind of real light and airy, and you really feel like you can kind of get kind of a feeling of that location and that time of year that movie was kind of set in. Anyways, that's going back to a very old reference, but basically it's just kind of an overexposed photograph. All right, now I'm using some of my manganese. I just pulled this out on one of my previous videos, most recent videos, and I really like this color, so I'm just going to add this in. Okay, now this is some glossy cardstock that I'm working on, and this ink, Marvy inks, are kind of thin in general. They're very bright, but they're not very thick, so they kind of absorb into the paper very quickly, so I'm being careful just to use a very light touch, okay? So I'm barely touching my page and dragging it in. And with each mark that I do like that, it's not really leaving very much of a mark. So what I do is if I want it to get darker, I'm going over it with repetition, and that's what takes care of my brush tips like this. You know, these sponge tips, they're not going to wear out on me very quickly or tear, okay? So you just take it nice and easy, and you get what you want in repetition. But that's not only for the care of your tips here, but it's also for the ease of kind of your color application. Yeah, it takes a little bit longer than to press down and really get that in there, you know, like a big slathering of ink, but it's a much more controlled application because you're laying down very little ink at any given time. It's almost akin to, let's say, if these inks were kind of used more like chalks, you know. I mean, I'm not talking about the media being the same or similar to inks. I'm just saying kind of you're laying down layers of this ink very lightly at a time, okay? So I'm using wet media kind of like the way that I would use dry media, okay? You're just kind of applying a little bit at a time, and that makes it very user-friendly and very controlled, and I'm not getting, you know, a bunch of isolated oval shapes everywhere on the scene, okay? You can do this with cosmetic sponges too. You just kind of wipe it in like that, you know. You can even use like a paper towel, kind of wad it up or something like that, you know. But you just get a good saturation of ink going. Okay. Now I'm using that color pen because they don't have this particular color in pad form or reinker form, so you can use, you know, pens that you have. I don't know, you wouldn't use an extra fine tip or something like that. That would take forever to ink this up, but just to come to show you that you can really mix and match your different inks out there in whatever form that you happen to have, and utilize them for the purpose that you know, you're setting out to do. Okay, so I'm all for kind of using the material that you have. Okay, so I'm kind of developing a color, well, color scheme, but it's a lighting scheme here. Okay. Okay. It's really dry here in the middle, so I'm being very careful not to press down too hard on this tip, you know, and leave too definitive a mark. And I'm just touching this again. I'm just kind of dragging it in. It's really grabbing the this pad here, this tip, but again, I'm not applying pressure, and I'm just pulling it in one direction. I have that notation on the tip packs and the multi-packs of stylus tools and tips that we sell, because I really want people, you know, I want everyone's materials to go a long way and not to you know, have to replace them you know, frequently or at all, you know, in an ideal sense. Okay, I'm going to create a horizon line. Now there's very little space up here, so this would be better if I had some kind of transparency, because I can't really see underneath it. So my horizon line's just, I don't know, we're talking about it like 1/8 of an inch from the top, just because I didn't leave very much space up there behind those islands. Okay, I'm going with the Salvia blue. It's a little bit of a darker blue. It's kind of a muted blue compared to that manganese blue from the, you know, the pen. If I didn't happen to mention that, that's the number 36 color from Marvy. They go off the numbering system. Okay, but anyways, just adding this down like so. Anyways, there's that really slight horizon line up there. You can barely see it because this color is not very dark at all, so it's not leaving a, super dark horizon line or application of ink. Okay, now what I'm doing is I'm just kind of adding a little bit of a shadow at the base of these two islands with this ink. Okay. Alright. Kind of blending that in a little bit at the top. I don't want to have just a super hard definitive line, and I'll add more color up there as well. Okay, now I'm not going to bring these colors in too far. I don't think. I'll see. But that's the general concept, the darker you go, you don't take those colors in to the scene quite as far. Alright, now I do have these kind of grassy bluffs, and I will be adding green to that. Okay, so, but blue is a component of green, so I can add that in the mix right now. And then when I do bring the green colors into it, it won't look blue anymore, but it'll have somewhat of a foundation of that blue, which will give continuity between those grassy areas and the water. Okay, I'll put a streak or two, in these completely blank areas. Okay. Kind of leave it a little bit streaky. I'm not coloring in the whole thing. I'm kind of making these elongated streaks, to kind of go along with the spirit of, the water and the striations. The horizontal kind of streaks that water might create, or the patterns. Alright, so I have that right now. Leave some areas a little bit light down here if you want that to kind of glisten. Alright, let's try, how about a Bahama Blue? I can never have enough blue, there's a line of pads called Vivid, and I wish those were still around, because there was about, I don't know, 8 different versions of blue in that line. Very, very early dye-based pads. Okay, so this, if I didn't say it, this is Bahama Blue here. Very, or a pretty bright blue. I'll use one that's even brighter than this. Bright is the term meaning the relative intensity of a color. Or bright doesn't necessarily mean, or doesn't mean, light in terms of value, okay? It's the intensity of something. There could be a very dark color and it could be very bright. And there could be a very light one and be very dull. If you add like white to it, like pastels, those aren't very bright colors. They're very light. They're light versions, but they're not bright. They're not intense. They're kind of muted. Okay, see where this is kind of going? Add this to my kind of grassy little shores here. Alright, boy, I hate doing this with the horizon line. The horizon line is just so tiny up there. It's kind of hard to get it a little bit. And holding this down, I may have so little area to work with. I mean, it's not hard or anything like that. But I don't know, you just have to make sure that you have a good grip on the, you know, this piece of paper right here. There's not very much to hold. Okay, oops, I see that it's kind of skewed. Let me see. All right, there we go. All right, something like that. A little bit of a slightly stronger horizon line. Not super strong up there, but I don't know, present, you might say. Okay, I'm kind of creating some deeper shadows in this little kind of grassy bluff here. Those are the shores left and right. Okay, just to kind of create my shadows. You want to kind of, the objects within your scene, you want to give them kind of an opacity by creating shadows around it. Okay, even though there are shadows and definition in terms of light and dark in the designs themselves, but anything that's kind of, if you have a scene that's kind of rendered, you know, in terms of the forms, there's darks and lights and things and shadows, you should kind of do that for everything to give the scene kind of an overall visual continuity. Okay, let's see here. This is number 3 blue. There's this piece of sticker on the bottom of this. This is, that pad was used in a publication, and I did a few scenes, and they just said, well, why don't you send in some of the media, materials and media that you used on your submissions. I think it was the Encyclopedia of Rubber Stamping. A really fantastic book. Okay, giving that island a little bit of a shadow there. Okay, let me do this one more time with one more color here. Kind of making my horizon line a little bit darker and more defined. Okay, here's my horizon line up there. Kind of gets a little bit diffused right in there, that section. Okay, and I'll add some more down here. Now this area on the bottom of my scene, this composition, by the way, was created in a stamp sketching video recently, and I'm just going in and wanting to color it. But in the stamp sketch, everything down here gets very busy. There's a lot of form, textures, you know, from the creation of that stamp sketch. So kind of muting. Well, it's not muting, but creating a bit of decreasing the contrast, I should say, between that black stamped image and the white of the card, okay, is going to unify things a little bit, and I think kind of just get it to mellow out a little bit in terms of just how busy, you know, that those areas seem to be, okay? There's a lot of contrast between a black stamped image and a white card base, you know, that you're stamping it on. So by decreasing some of them, you know, that range of values, okay, in those given areas, you know. Those objects don't seem quite as pronounced, and therefore they'll kind of blend in a little bit with the background depending on how dark you take the areas behind them. Okay, so that is that. Let's go to black with this. Or, let me see, I happen to have a little bit of a darker blue here than the Prussian blue. It's one of the few blues that I can take after a very, very dark blue in whatever colors you're working with, whatever brand you're working with. The Marvy Prussian blue is very, very dark, and I don't know. Take that value up, you know, just one more notch. If you've seen the movie Spinal Tap, we're taking this color value up to 11. Okay, kind of darkening that shadow, you know, creating a little bit of a darker shadow for that island up there. Okay. Alright, getting in my shadows a little bit more around here. Okay. Right. Let's go to black. I didn't know if I was going to do that, but speaking of the kind of busyness down here, I think this will really kind of set things in motion as far as the blending of form, okay? Integration of form. We have a lot of separate objects right in that area, and it's a little bit busy, you know. So they're still there, and we can still see them, but it's not quite as hectic down here. And in doing so, we are kind of creating you know, stronger lighting scheme as a result of doing this too. So kind of light is defined by shade when it comes to stamping like this. You know, we're working with light, so we have to define light through the use of contrast. Alright, so there we go, right here. It's going to come around. Alright, let's hit this up with some green. Let's put some green into those shoreline banks. Okay, I'm still using some of this black here. I wanted to create a little bit of a stronger kind of vignette. Okay, so like that. Alright, I wasn't going to do it. I thought I was done. Let's go with a little bit of a stronger horizon line. It'll just match the bottom of the scene a little bit more by having some of this black up top. Okay, there we go. Alright, now let's see, do I have a clean sponge tip here? I think I have a good color to go with. Peeled paint. with my last scene that I did, I added a little bit of a warm tinge to my scene. Kind of a warm, I don't know if it's a base layer. It was a warm glaze, I guess you can say. It doesn't have to be a base layer, okay? But it is one of the lighter tones. But let's add some of this in and just kind of make the scene slightly richer. Okay, let's see if we can zoom. I don't need to zoom in. You can see it right here, I think, in the camera. So a little bit of warmth like that. Let's not do it everywhere, but let's incorporate that kind of tint into the scene, okay? And I think it'll just look a little bit more kind of full as a result, okay? Do you see that? It was looking a little anemic without it, don't you think? So that's one of the things about, you know, colors. I mean, when you're doing kind of color schemes this way, layering, the layering of inks, building up your inks, those lighter tones can often play a really significant role. You know, in this case, it's really adjusting the temperature of the entire scene, or influencing it, or I guess creating it, you know, in terms of it being a warm hue, warm temperature, amidst an otherwise very cool scene, temperature-wise. Okay. All right. Let's try the peel paint. Just use the same tip right here. Okay, a little bit of an olive-y green, kind of an aged, you know, green as in, you know, most of the distress inks. You know, that kind of the spirit of them. That green in there. I'll bring a little bit of that green into my water as well. Let's say the green is reflecting in the water's surface a little bit. Okay. You don't have to color everything, okay? Leave, you know, have some variation in there. Have some lighter greens and darker greens. Don't color in everything. You'll get a nice variation and kind of the spirit of lighting in something when you don't color everything in kind of uniformly. You know, mono value. Have multiple values in there. That's just done by not coloring in everything 100% with that any given hue. Okay. Something like that. A little bit down here in the water. Right? It's a little bit more substantial, huh? You know, giving her something to stand on. It's kind of fleshed in more. Okay, let's see what we have here. Here's bamboo leaves and cottage ivy. Layering additional values of a given hue, and I guess different variations of them, can add a nice rich touch or richness to, you know, those given objects. Okay, so it's not just going, okay, that's green and just doing one green in there, but using multiple ones, you know, to add a bit more of a kind of a rich form, kind of to the different shadow areas and regions of a given object. Okay, sections of them, not regions. Okay. Alright, this is the bamboo leaves. It's kind of a, I don't know, it's kind of olive, you know, green. Maybe it's slightly warmer. This one is cottage ivy. I'm working through just some different variations, okay? You don't have to go, if I didn't have these two and I had some other brand of, a darker color green, that would be fine. I would just use that one. I'm not being brand specific, I just happen to have those ones, right next to me on my desk, so I'm using that. Okay. I'm reiterating the shadows of the designs, okay? There's a darker area on the design, I'm just hitting it with some darker ink, so you don't have to kind of invent everything from scratch, okay? The shaded areas are on the design, so I'm just hitting those shaded areas with, some of these darker values. Hitting a little bit of shadow underneath my lady with coffee there. Right at the base. Okay. So we have something like that. I'm just, pointing out the forms down here. She's going to be colored something, but this brush tip is not great for that purpose, so I'll use some pens for that. Okay, so let's see, I think it might be time for some pens. Alright. Now, there's a lot of different ways you can approach this. I'm just going to pull out some of my alcohol pens that are somewhat in the spirit of the color scheme itself. Okay, so I don't want to go with too dark of a green, okay? I'd rather kind of create my variations using some lighter tones, and if I need to go up into my darker ones, I will. So blue tones, let's see. These are Shuttle Art alcohol pens. Any type of alcohol pen brand will do. Let's use some of the Plumes too. There's some very light versions in here. Okay, so we'll have something like these. These are the colors that I kind of used in pad form, aren't they? Let's see if I can focus in here. See these? And these caps right here are, they're pretty true to the actual tones or actual values of the colors themselves. All right, let's see. I'm going to go in here and create some shadows underneath some of these rocks, or a lot of them. This is this color right here. It's kind of a, well, what does it say? It says pastel blue. Okay, so this is going to give my rocks a little bit of shading. If it happens to be too dark, I can always kind of blend it in a little bit more, but what I'm doing is I'm just kind of putting a little bit of shadow right at the base of the rock. And again, it's just like doing the thing that I said, it's kind of giving the rocks some opacity, saying that they're actually casting a shadow. Kind of at the base of this shoreline, I'm creating a stronger shadow right at the base of it, and it is on the design itself, but I'm just reiterating it with some colored ink as opposed to it just being all rendered in black dots we call stippling in pen and ink drawing. Alright, so anyways, I've kind of added some of these down there. Kind of gives a little bit of stronger kind of lighting scheme by adding some shadows at the base of some of these rocks, okay? And it's a fairly light blue. It doesn't stand out too much. Let's see what this one is. This one's called baby blue. Maybe it's a different hue. It's less greenish than that pastel one, so I don't know, we can add a little bit of that into the mix. Maybe if it's a taller rock, maybe it's casting a kind of a stronger, larger shadow. And you don't need to worry about The alcohol inks smearing or, you know, blending with the dye-based inks. They're different binders, so it shouldn't. Alright, let's see what we have here. This one is pale green. It looks really dry. It was kind of open. I might not have capped it real well. Alright, let me just use the chisel tip here. Let me just add some of this in my green areas. Okay, it's a lighter version of green than what I've already laid down for the most part. So my addition in here is, it's very subtle. I can see it though, and I'm sure it's brightening up some areas, which is good. Okay. Alright, I'm going to store this one point down, or fine point down, because that part was a little bit dry. I think, like I said, I think I forgot to cap it or something. Alright, this is called Deep Olive Green. Let's try and add a little bit of shadow areas right in here. Okay. It's very subtle. I could barely see it sitting here myself. Okay. Let's see. This one is Azure Blue. Okay. Okay, let's put a few little streaks across here like so. I'm doing this type of thing, you know. From the left side of the page I'll go in like that, and from the right side I'll come in like that, so I'll get that kind of tapered streak. Okay. So it's just kind of like my color application with the sponges. I'm doing a very light touch, okay? So I'm getting that kind of tapered application here. And those streaks are kind of a nice little addition in here. And it's something that you can't really get with, well, I mean, it's a different stroke than you can get with, you know, your dye-based inks with like a sponge or something like that. The sponge isn't applying, you know, a hard line like that. It's, you know, it's very light and delicate because of the nature of the material itself. You know, the sponge. It's full of holes, for one thing. Alright, this is melon, a little bit more green in here. I could put a streak or two in the water, too, if I want to. I don't know if I want to. Well, maybe a little bit. Just to create a little bit more continuity between, you know, the shore and, you know, the surrounding area. That's the beauty of these pens. This is a very, very light pen here in terms of value, so you can kind of add it down there without making too much of a commitment to that hue. Alright, which is this aquamarine here? Okay. Yeah, it's very, very light and very dull. Can add it in. Not all. I mean, this might be aquamarine, but it's a very, very light value aquamarine. I've had some aquamarines and oil paints, and very, very bright, very deep color. I think that was my favorite oil painting blue. Okay. All right, let's see. Let's address her clothes right here. Oh, let's give her, I don't know, some sort of fleshy colored legs, something subtle. Let's put her in kind of like a suede shirt or something like that. I think that would go well in this scene. This one happens to be, what is this? Salmon pink. Okay, let's see what that looks like. Yeah, I don't really like that. It looks like the same color as that one that I used for Flesh. But we mix and match, you know. Here's a yellow ochre. Okay. Just like that. It's still not there, but, you know, just like I blended in colors all around here, I'm doing the same thing in the form. Potato brown. Never used a lot of these colors before, so I'm hitting this in the shadow areas, okay? Just like everything else that I'm doing, I'm just kind of following the spirit of the design itself in terms of light and shadow. It's a little bit too orangish, so let's go into the browns. Here's a burnt sienna, okay? Potato brown. Let's see. I guess I do need all these sets of colors. There's certain colors that I have in my Plume sets that I don't. They didn't come in the 80 pen colors of the Shuttle art. So, okay, this one's sepia. Sepia. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. I've always said sepia. Might not be either one of those, I don't know. Okay, so adding this down. Now let's give her a little bit of a color to her hair. Oh. Just add a very light tinge. There's her boots as well. She's kind of matching her boots. Alright, now down here, let's create a little bit more of a shadow in the grass, okay? What color would you make the shadow? Well, shadows usually are a darker version of the, you know, the hue that the shadow is being cast on. So I'm adding a little bit of a darker green. This is a jungle green, it says. Okay, maybe I'll use a bit of a darker one, you know, even darker after that. I can use some of this down here in my darker regions. Okay. Yeah, let's go with a bit of a darker one. Here's this one's just called dark green. Okay. I haven't used most of my pens yet. I especially don't use too much of my darker ones, because the lighter ones, you know, you can fill in more areas. But so far so good, as far as all the pens that I've used. Okay, just adding a few little textural marks down with this dark green. There are some rocks in this, little tiny little rocks that I've drawn into the design, and just kind of creating a little bit more of a deeper shadow around those objects in the design. And it just, texturally, it just kind of, it adds to the overall kind of textural range of the scene. And those alcohol markers, when you kind of utilize them a certain way, they can almost look somewhat, you know, like painterly, can't they? The way the forms kind of, this one's the one that I didn't cap or something. It's not. Okay, let's go back to this one. No, this is spearmint. Okay. Let's add some of these on. You can kind of mix and match your alcohol pens. It's all the same binder, right? Kind of doing a little touchy mark, you know, to make it look a little bit more kind of brush work like? All right. I am looking at my water areas down here and some of those shadows. I want to... Ooh, that's way too dark. Look how dark that is. It's probably because I've never used that pen before. Like I said, I don't use my darker pens very often. Okay, this is a little bit better. This one's a Salvia Blue. I guess it's similar to Salvia Blue of the Marvy. Kinda. This one has a little bit more red in it. This one's a little bit of lighter value too. But let's just add a little bit of this down here just for some variation. Maybe add it into some of those areas in the shadows, you know, the rocks that are in the shadows. Let's add this into the grass too. We took some of that green and put it down in the water. Let's take some of this blue and put it up in the green. Get some of those kind of textures up here maybe too. This little blotchy kind of, you know, alcohol ink kind of separates a little bit, you know, especially when you hit it with a like a blender or that type of thing. Okay, so I'll go back and add a bit of that darker one, so let's go back in with some of this lighter version as well. Kind of spread that out a little bit and blend it. As you might might have noticed, I'm not doing this with any particular amount, you know, degree of high degree of, you know, kind of specific placement. I'm just kind of doing a kind of a little, I don't know, scattered type of touch on here. I wouldn't say it's totally random, but you know, it's kind of, you know. It's loose. I was going to say haphazard, but it's not haphazard. It's kind of a looser application of that. Okay, so we have that. That's looking really kind of bright to me, though. Let's try to mute some of this down a touch, okay? Let's try this gray as kind of a neutral here, okay? Let's add this, I don't know, this is a blue-gray 6, as they say in call it in the Shuttle art lineup, but it's, oh, I would say it's a 20% cool gray, you know, roughly about. Okay, so I'm just going to add this down across here. In my lighter areas. It could go in the, you know, some of the, or I meant in the darker areas. It could go in some of my lighter areas as well. Alright, so I just kind of wanted to mute it a little bit. Give it kind of a little bit of another common tone over the top. I don't know, you can play around with other things too. There's a warm gray number 2. Yeah, it's a little bit fleshy looking. I don't like that gray. Not for this color scheme here. Well, it doesn't look too bad, actually. So I'm not really using it for that hue. I'm just kind of, I don't know, using it for another kind of warm, kind of a subtone, you know, something underneath the surface that, you know, can kind of influence it, but not in a big way. All right. So that is that. As far as my coloring goes. All right, now let's add a little bit more shimmer to this scene. Let's give it more of a light, kind of airy, light and airy, I don't know, feel, atmosphere, whatever. Okay, we have our cotton swab here, true cotton, not one of those kind of acrylic ones that, you know, are so tightly bound. I'm kind of fraying this a little bit, you know, to, you know, give that tip a real soft, I don't know, a softness, I guess, you know, for a soft application. Okay, now this ink right here is pretty, it's pretty wet. All right, it's a pretty new pad in terms of usage, not in, you know, in terms of age. But I'm going to start this in my lighter areas. Okay, but one of the things you might do is you might want to take some ink off a little bit first. It'd be easier to see if I had a dark piece of paper. I don't have a dark piece of paper around here, but I'm really taking a lot of the ink off. Okay, so when I start applying this, it's applying in a very kind of a dry brushed application. Okay, I'm adding it down here in a light area, so I didn't take off so much of the ink because I knew I wouldn't need to. But if I'm adding it in my darker areas, it's really going to stand out, you know, in terms of the contrast. So, okay, so you know, in that case, I would take off quite a bit. But since I'm starting off in my lighter areas, I'm applying it in my lighter areas, and as I move away from that lit area, I'm kind of using a little bit less ink, you know, I'll apply a little bit less. Just so that it transitions off between light to dark. So it's thicker amount of inks to sparse, you know, out this way. Okay, now let's zoom in here. Kind of dread zooming in sometimes because I forget to work in the field of view for you viewers here, but I don't know, you need to see what I'm doing too. Okay, applying a little bit more ink, getting a little bit more, just dabbed in a couple more times. See that kind of transition down here between, you know, those rocks and the surrounding rocks. Okay, so the rocks that are in the light are a little bit more obscured, and then I'm adding some of this ink over the top of them, and it's making them look lighter. You can still see them because this ink isn't opaque, it's more translucent. So you're not eradicating what's down there, not, you know, and we don't want to. We just want to kind of subdue them a little bit in the name of lighting, okay? Same thing down here. Let's do some of that ink down there. I'll get a little bit more ink on my applicator here. Alright, I have a big blob of ink here, so I need to be careful about my application of it. It will rub off if you add too much, and I always do add too much, almost all the time. So I'll just kind of dab it off like that with my finger. You have plenty of time to kind of work with it, as long as it is not brilliance that white pigment ink, okay, brilliance, that dries very, very quickly. It seems like all other brands do not dry quickly, but the Brilliance was designed and conceived to dry quickly, okay? So the Brilliance will even dry on glossy cardstock. Every other brand will not if you stamp an image out in it. If you use pigment ink, white pigment ink, or pigment ink on glossy cardstock like I am here, just in a very thin layer, it will dry just fine. It might not dry instantly, okay, but we're not talking, you know, weeks or anything like that. You know, it'll dry overnight usually. And what you should do anyways is you should kind of spray seal your scenes afterwards to kind of protect it, especially with an application of pigment ink like this one. It kind of dries to a kind of like a chalky finish, and it's very prone to, you know, kind of just being wiped right off. It's not like a very permanent type of ink on this type of cardstock. More so on matte cardstock, it'll dry pretty well because it's kind of absorbing as well as drying. All right, so we have that. See that kind of those rocks in here used to be that dark, but I've kind of blotted them off a little bit. But there is variation. There's some that are a little bit lighter and some that are a little bit darker than others, and that's, you know, kind of the fun of it. You vary, you know, your surface area just like we're varying the amounts of ink we use up here in terms of, you know, the addition of ink. In this, we are adding ink, but it's almost like you're kind of removing it in terms of the visibility of it, so it's just not quite as apparent. Like I said, it's physically still there, but you're just kind of subduing it in terms of how much you can see of it. Okay, so kind of really lightening up some of that area. So this is what it looks like right here. It's a little bit more dimensional, isn't it? Pigment ink will dry darker than what it looks like after, you know, than when it's freshly applied. So, I mean, it's really hard to tell. You kind of have to apply it and get the gist of it. Look at how much it has changed after it dries. So it depends on how much you apply, what brand of pigment ink you're using, and what type of paper that you're using as well, I guess. So they're not all the same. They're similar, though. I haven't seen a pigment ink that dries, you know, lighter or looks as quite as light as it does when it's been freshly applied. I don't know why that is. There's something that's kind of happening to it. Maybe there's a kind of an absorbency factor, you know. Maybe some of it gets absorbed in the paper. I don't know. Okay, so adding this into my lighter areas up here. Start in the light areas and kind of work out into your darker areas. Creating that little passage of light right through there. Let's take a look at this. Let me see if I can hold it at an angle where you can see where I'm applying it. Yeah, you can see it's real smudgy in those areas, right? That, can you see that white pigment? It's real blotchy right that, but it looks like that. Okay. Let's apply some behind her in that water. It's kind of making the water glow a little bit. Okay. Let's do that thing about we're kind of overexposing things a little bit. Let's put a little bit of this pigment ink on the side of her, on some parts of her that are facing that light, okay? On a camera, you know, a lot of cameras have these built-in filters, so this one might be akin to something like a backlit softness, okay? So she's kind of a little bit softened on that side of her, facing the light. And I'll kind of put a little bit of light on this shoreline right here, on the kind of the crest of it. Okay. Obscuring kind of the silhouette of it too. Alright, let's put a little bit on these, like these leaves here too. Right there, a little bit bathed in light. Put on some of these leaves as well. You can kind of influence these leaves in terms of the shadows as well as the light when you use something like this, like pigment ink. Okay, just look at that. It's like kind of a little fun little passage in there in terms of the lighting. Okay, I'm really good putting a pretty big slathering up here because it's so light. In terms of those blue streaks up there that I can, you know, I can add it in there without it looking kind of awkward. Okay, here's an island right here. See that silhouette of that top of that island? It's kind of, ooh, that's a little bit too much ink. Do it a little bit slower. Yeah, let's see. Too much ink on there. Changing a little bit and then dabbing off, okay. Just so there's a little bit of variation on there. There we go. So that island is kind of a little bit obscured. Over here it's a little bit more in shadow, so, well, let's see if I can add a little bit on there. Yeah, a little bit. That looks okay. Let's add a little bit more to this one. Kind of vary it a little bit more. Okay, so you kind of see that? It's like light is kind of hitting it where it's more defined on this side, and this side it's a little bit obscure, kind of, you know, with the background light up there. Let's add a little bit of this to that sky area, the horizon. Okay. Something like that. Let's put her a little bit more in that light. Sometimes I add so much of this I almost feel like I'm kind of like painting, but I do see the pigment ink almost like paint, you know, it's so thick. It seems less like ink than it does paint. Okay, so that is that with the pigment ink. let's go on this with a white gel pen for now. I might use another colored gel pen, I'm not sure. But just like we did with that pigment ink, let's start in the lighter areas when you're working with a light medium, okay? And then I'll work out into my shadows and kind of taper the marks. I'll distance them, you know, from one another a little bit more. I can kind of create larger little reflective, you know, shimmering dots here. It's supposed to represent shimmering light. So you kind of start on the lighter areas and just kind of cluster them. And this kind of reiterates your lighting as well. So we did it in a very general way, very soft, general application in the form of that pigment ink, and this is a way to do it with a very specific little, you know, marks. Okay. I can put some on the tops of some of these rocks. You know, like they're capturing some light. Just as I put a shadow at the base of them to represent, you know, the darker aspects of it. A little shimmer coming off there. Okay. It's very specific. This is what it'll look like, you know, more at arm's distance. And you just kind of follow this little passage up through, you know, your lighting scheme. So it's kind of lit down, you know, right in the center of our scene, okay? Come up here. Okay, flip this around. Add some up here. Okay, create a little bit of a shimmer like that. So can you see that right around in here? You can't really see that in the camera, I don't think, too much. Here's down there. You see it through the, see some of the darker passages here. Dots right out here. Okay, let's put some on our leaves. Let's have some of those leaves reflecting some of that nice light coming from the whatever light source we happen to have in here. For the most part, I'm doing a little dot, speck of a dot, whatever, around the branch, on leaves, on the top sides of them for the most part. Yeah, it's being kind of top lit, so there's that little branch. More in the lit areas, okay? I don't have it too much out here on the sides because those areas are darker, you know, so that object would probably be in a little bit more of a shadow. Doesn't mean you can't use some here and there. Okay. Okay, alright, so those leaves are kind of capturing and reflecting some of that sunlight. And let's put a few little highlights on my these little bluffs right here. I shaded the darker regions, so why not highlight the light regions, okay? Glistening waters. I've left enough of it light where, these little dots like this, I can afford to put in quite a bit because they don't stand out quite so much. If it was darker, then, this might look crazy. But you can add it quite a bit, add quite a bit of it if you've retained enough of your lighter areas or the light of the, the white of the paper. Alright, so anyways, I think that looks good. We have our nice passage of light through here. Slight horizon. And these little kind of reflective type of objects throughout here, as well as the entire area. And I think that kind of gives it the spirit of kind of what I was looking for in this scene. I've always used, with my last scene too, I've almost used just as much alcohol inks as I did dye-based. Well, maybe not, but I did put on quite a bit. If I touch this in just about any part of the scene, it's rather sticky, as alcohol inks, kind of layered into a certain area kind of feel. But anyways, those are kind of fun types of media to utilize on different scenes because you can really hit some specific areas. So my general process is to go from kind of lighter tones, and I work into my darker tones, then I go back to that lighter tone, just to kind of blend out those alcohol ink applications. Okay, so it can be more of a circular process. You don't always have to work linear, like, okay, I'm starting from light to dark, in dye-based inks, now I'm starting from light to dark in alcohol inks, and so on and so forth. You can always go back in and add more of a given hue or value, or in this case, different temperatures, right over the top of other inks and other types of inks or media that you've already laid down. Okay, so anyways, this is the real fun part for me down here. Yeah, I really wanted to create kind of a little passage that seemed really alive, and you can see on her shoes, this character, I've kind of lightened, this side of her, the left side of her, to kind of represent, that lighting direction that has been established in the scene. Let me add a little bit more here. So it kind of turns her a little bit, and makes it look like she's not so much of a kind of a two-dimensional object, you know, doing it this way. Darker on one side, lighter on the other. And that's what we're doing throughout here. It's darker on one side and lighter on the other. So things hopefully look a little bit more dimensional that way. Because the treatment of them is not the same, you know, from one side or one area of them to the next. Or to the opposite side in many cases. High and low, left and right. And it's easy to do. Most people just color it the whole thing, but I'm just coloring like half, you know, so I'm doing like less work in many cases. And, you know, so in this water here, you don't just color in all that water completely, you just kind of color it in lighter in the middle, but when you move into your darker tones, you just keep your darker tones on the perimeter. And the grassy areas up here, instead of just coloring the whole thing, you know, light green, medium, dark green, you go light green, medium green, and then the darker greens are just in the darker regions, okay? So it just means you use a little bit less, and you vary things. And that, to me, is easier, and it makes it look like you really know what you're doing as far as lighting goes. You don't have to get too specific either, okay? I could have had other areas darker and other areas lighter, and it would look just fine, you know? There's just variation, that's all you're going for. So with your darker tones, just kind of put on the brakes a little bit. Okay, so a little bit more ink. I could do this all day. Okay, so hope you enjoyed the scene. I certainly enjoyed coloring it in. I really kind of itch to finish off these scenes whenever I do these stamp sketching videos. I kind of have to force myself not to finish them off. I have to put them away or something like that and forget about them, you know, to get on with it. But I really enjoy finishing these off because as I'm doing these, I'm kind of imagining, you know, kind of a general feel, nothing specific, but just kind of a general feel of what, you know, I can do with these scenes. This would have been a great one in a sunset form too, have her looking out in the ocean, kind of a really nice sunset. Okay, thanks so much for watching. Thanks for tuning into the channel. And if you have any questions, just drop us a note in the comment section.